R's. Can you spell that without any R's?
Yes, I can. T-H-A-T.
The school board gets 5 points. Okay. Well, welcome to a unusual Super Commons meeting. I don't believe we've had one of these for several years. In fact, individuals like Ms. Duncan and Mr. Show, this is your first. I'm John Camp. I'm chair of this illustrious group. I welcome you. I'd like to remind everybody that in the vestibule there just outside the entrance doors, the Open Meetings Act of Nebraska is posted. I think maybe I can put this back there. We have a tight agenda today before you. First, what I'd like to do is have quick introductions of the members of the school board, the city council, and the county board. And so perhaps, Ms. Danny?
Carl Eskridge, City Council, Northwest Lincoln.
Jennifer Brinkman, County Board.
Matt Schulte on the school board.
Benny Schoten, Lincoln City Council at large.
Barbara Byer, Lincoln Board of Education.
Jane Raybold, Lincoln City Council, Southwest District. Deb Shore, Lancaster County.
Lanny Boswell, Lincoln School Board.
John Camp with the Lincoln City Council, and you in my district.
Todd Wilchin, I am on a county board representing District 5, which is the northeast part of the city and county, and I'm also the chair of the county board this year.
Roy Christensen, Lincoln City Council at large, chair of the city council.
John Mayhew, Board of Education.
Lyrian Bear, Lincoln City Council at large member.
Annie Mungard, Lincoln Board of Education.
Bill Avery, County Board of Commissioners.
Cindy Lamb, Lincoln City Council, Northeast District. Connie Duncan, Board of Education.
Steve Joseph.
And I understand that Mayor Beitler is somewhere in transit and so will not be able to join us, so we'll fill him in on those notes, and I know a number of his staff members are here. Deb Shore is the vice chair of the Commons, and I believe has some introductions.
In addition, we invited the rural school districts, within Lancaster County to have a representative here, invited them to be a part of the presentation, listen. And I know we have Dr. John Scretta from Norris Public Schools here, and I don't know if we have any of the other districts represented.
We also have Norris School Board member Jim Craig. Thank you.
Jim, thank you for being here.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. At this meeting, we have an agenda that's very tight. I believe there are 7 topics on the agenda, and I'm going to hold us all to a tight time frame. Originally, we were going to conclude at 10:15, but I think we will go on to 10:30, although if there are some of you who have prior obligations, we understand if you have to excuse yourself. I'd like for the moment to turn the meeting over to Carl Eskridge, who has been helpful in... Excuse me?
Hand him the mic.
Hand him the mic.
I guess I will have to hand him the mic. I lost my control.
We should do that more often. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We do have a very full agenda. This is the second Super Commons meeting that I've been involved in, and the first one was shortly after the Sandy Hook shooting, and it's very unfortunate that it takes these kinds of things to bring us together, but it does. And so the purpose of this Super Commons initially was to look at school safety and ways that we can help to provide greater safety for the kids and staff that work in our public schools. And well, since then there have been some additional issues that have come forward. So we do have a very full agenda with a lot of important information to have today. We're going to hold questions until the very end so that we do have opportunity for everybody to present the information that we need to hear. So to begin with, we'll start with Joe Wright, the Director of Security for Lincoln Public Schools. Joe?
Thank you. Good morning. Lincoln Public Schools approaches safety and security in a comprehensive manner. Our goal is to provide an environment where students feel safe to learn, staff feel safe to teach, and visitors feel safe to experience 21st century education in progress. There are many components to school security. All of our staff members, along with our students, work hard to provide their best efforts to make each building as safe as it can be. Considerations around the safety and security of our students has been prevalent in LPS for decades. Our operations staff provide what commonly comes to mind when we first think of security at a school, in a school setting. With the support of our community, our 2014 bond issue created funding for the design and construction of secure entries at many of our buildings. We also began installing cameras in our schools in 2014. Our 6 large high schools are equipped with a comprehensive camera system. We use cameras in other buildings in a limited scale to manage unique concerns at those sites. Our operations staff construct and maintain our properties in excellent condition. A clean building in good repair creates an environment where students, staff, and visitors behave in a professional and safe manner. Crime prevention through environmental design is a foundational concept long in practice at LPS through the leadership of our Director of Operations, Scott Wieskamp, and his staff. Our planning committee is currently reviewing community requests and questions related to our physical security features in our schools. LPS is in transition to a digital curriculum. The majority of our students have a tablet assigned to them. Our buildings are networked with hotspots and interconnected with fiber. Because our digital reality is so prominent, our cybersecurity effort has to be robust as well. Kirk Langer and our computing services staff provide security for our data as well as for our students. Access to the internet is usually a good thing. Our human resources staff hire and train our employees who create positive relationships with our students and parents. Our teachers and administrators know when a student enters LPS, every parent of that student begins a 12-year journey as our customer. Partnerships with parents create common expectations in our students that result in student success. Student success is safety. Students routinely report concerns of incidents to trusted staff members. We have a strong positive culture of see something, say something. Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports, PBIS, programming provides social, emotional, and behavioral support for our 43,000 students. Curriculum staff add to PBIS anti-bullying and suicide prevention work. Our social workers and counselors are available to offer individualized support for all of our students and provide crisis response services when tragedy occurs. We work with behavioral health partners to provide a one-of-a-kind emergency response to students and families in crisis who have no connection to other help. Our special education programming is at work in every school. LPS provides success school programming at all grade levels to assist students with behavioral issues with a goal of transitioning them back to their original schools. Our district transitioned to the plain language standard response protocol 4 years ago. This not only provides for a uniform response to incidents at school, but now it is the recommended protocol across the state. Our students can react and respond to emergencies when they attend events outside of our district. Each school has a crisis response plan based on the standard response protocol. Many of our community organizations have also adopted the standard response protocol, including YMCA, Parks and Recreation. Think about how much safer our kids are when everywhere they go, the same emergency language is used. Our high school campus supervisors have all been certified in de-escalation training. We have extended campus supervisor presence into the evening hours. We've worked with Lancaster County Emergency Management to determine what best to do during severe weather events, not only at our schools, but each of our athletic venues. Every LPD cruiser and each LFR apparatus has a library of our building's blueprints on the hard drive of its mobile data terminal. Our doors are numbered and emergency responders can gain entry into our buildings at all times. With beginnings at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln has become a hub of threat assessment knowledge. LPS has a threat assessment and management program and works closely with the Lincoln Lancaster County Threat Advisory Team, which is hosted by the Lincoln Police Department. We look forward to the proposed addition of mental health services, social workers, and officers assigned to threat assessment responsibilities and as school resource officers to take our community's ability to manage threats in a preventive way to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we'll hear from Tom Cassidy, Public Safety Director, and Chief Jeff Blymeister of Lincoln Police Department about school resource officers in Lincoln.
Thank you, Councilman Eskridge. School resource officers from the Lincoln Police Department have been in Lincoln Public Schools for 30 years, continuously for the past 24 years. If you want to know how they're going to operate, how the officers are going to comport themselves, you have a quarter century experience to draw on. Ask. Ask your principals, ask your staff, ask your students. Ask adults who had school resource officers in their school clear back in the early 1990s, or even, for that matter, the early 1970s. You really don't have to go far to find out how this will operate if we add to the number of school resource officers. It costs us about $100,000 a year in Lincoln to put a police officer in the field. About 2/3 of that cost is salary. The mid-range salary for a Lincoln police officer is just a little bit over $70,000. The remainder of that amount is benefits and the annual cost of operating a vehicle. That $100,000 cost doesn't include the cost of equipment. Police cruiser costs about $50,000. Every officer has about $6,000 worth of personal equipment that's issued. All of that equipment, the vehicle and the personal equipment, has a lifespan of roughly 5 years on average. And that $100,000 cost also doesn't include the indirect costs, the cost of things like supervision, like training, and all the support services that are necessary for police officers to do their work. The cost of SROs is going to rise over time. Part of that will just be the natural inflation that occurs, but part of it will also be increasing numbers of SROs, because I expect that we'll want to add SROs as the number of middle schools and high schools increases here in Lincoln over the next several years. Under our current agreement between the city and Lincoln Public Schools pays 35% of the cost of direct cost of those officers. The city picks up 65% of the direct cost, and the city of Lincoln takes care of all of the indirect costs. I'll turn it over to Jeff.
So as you heard the director say, the number of officers assigned to the schools has varied during our history, but the focus has remained the same. Opening lines of communication, building relationships in advance of unthinkable events, sharing experiences in the classroom, and being yet another positive influence in the lives of the kids. Today, we have 6 SROs that serve in the 6 Lincoln Public High Schools. Each of these campuses have a combined student, teacher, and support staff, a population that exceeds that of Hickman, Nebraska. Local discussions following the deplorable acts on February 14th in Parkland, Florida, has brought about the potential, the opportunity to look at this in depth. Any improvement to the safety of our schools has to be multifaceted. There is no singular solution. School resource officers are one component. Adding SROs takes time. The Lincoln Police Department has the smallest ratio of officers per 1,000 of the 27 municipalities with a population over 5,000 in the state of Nebraska. We do not have the staffing capacity to immediately supplement officers serving in the schools. We must recruit, extensively vet, and train new officers to fill positions so we can dedicate experienced and trained officers to serve as SROs. This process can take up to 18 months, and we cannot compromise the quality of our staff to expedite full-time staffing in the schools. But once again, an opportunity presents itself. We have a new academy class that begins on July 19th, 2018. If we receive authorization at least a month in advance of that date, we are in a position to expedite the timeline. School resource officers in Lincoln have a passion to serve kids. Their roles are distinct and separate from the administrative disciplinary processes best held and completed by those in the schools. They receive advanced training through the National Association of School Resource Officers. In partnership with Region 5, they receive a 40-hour behavioral health assessment training. They receive training on implicit bias and cultural competency. De-escalation skills are part of almost every training that we provide to our staff. By policy and by practice, our officers, including the SROs, employ discretion, recognizing that every time we are called to quell a disturbance doesn't need to result in a citation. As this public discussion has gained traction, I've heard from concerned parents, educators, and solicited input from those advocating their positions. Disparity exists in society, and the criminal justice system is no exception. Our response to calls for service in middle schools has decreased since SROs were removed from the middle schools. But so have the calls for service at the high schools, both in spite of tremendous growth in our community and student population. In an ad hoc study done informally in 2013 at the Lincoln Police Department, of the juvenile referrals, so citations to juveniles coming out of the 6 schools that have school resource officers, only 3% were the result of a proactive work by the part of an SRO. Following these discussions, we replicated that process using the same methodology. In 2017, and that number was consistent. 3% are a result of on-view work by our SROs. Establishing a causal relationship with some type of negative outcome as a result of SROs being in our schools is just dependent on how you want to view the world with your lens. Physical assaults make up the majority of the referrals that we are called to investigate. That's why programs that Sarah Hoyle is going to talk to you about, like Project Restore, school-based alcohol and marijuana intervention, and Operation Tipping Point, are so important to this overall process. Evidence-based strategies that hold students accountable for the behaviors, but provide methods for success, all meant to prevent an immersion into the criminal justice system. What we do know is the lasting impact SROs have made on the lives of students. Those stories have been shared over and over again. The desire to be part of the success of a child's life, similar to teachers and everybody in this room today, is real. A teacher and good friend of mine, Dr. Helen Fagan, shared a lasting strategy with me. Be intentional about surrounding yourself with those who see and experience the world differently, and get to know them. That's another role SROs are playing. They know the kids, and the kids know them. An officer who served as an SRO told me about his personal struggle with cancer as I reached out for real stories, anecdotal stories about this. And when he went in for his first chemo treatment, the nurse standing next to him was a former student that he served while he was at East High School. When he was filled with uncertainty and at one of the lowest points in his life, that relationship brought assurance. Those impacts cannot be measured through any type of statistical analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Chief. We're also going to hear now from Sheriff Terry Wagner on school resource officers in county schools. Sheriff.
Morning. Thank you, Councilman Eskridge. Lancaster County has 4 distinct school districts in our boundaries. Raymond Central in the northwest part of the county, Malcolm Public Schools, Waverly Public Schools, and Norris Public Schools. On any given day, as Chief Blymeister alluded to, those schools become our second largest city in Lancaster County in some cases. Norris, I think, has 2,300 or 2,400 total people, staff and students on their campus on any given day. And so it is a community in and of itself. Rural schools tend to be a bit different than urban schools in a number of different facets. For example, Raymond Central has middle school and high school on their campus. It's located at an old missile site in northwest Lancaster County, so it's in the middle of a mile section. Evacuation of students from that building would be problematic, or is problematic, and different strategies have to be employed. Norris is much the same. It has K through 12 on its campus, and several different buildings, and so the SRO has a huge job there. But again, it's in the middle of a mile section as well, or on the corner, I guess. But there aren't any other facilities close by. Malcolm is different in that it has K through 12 on its campus, and it's on the northwest edge of the town of Malcolm. But again, it's a large community in and of itself every day. Waverly is unique and different than the other 3 districts in that their buildings are somewhat separated. We have an SRO assigned full-time to the Waverly Public Schools. We have an SRO assigned full-time to Norris Public Schools, and then another SRO splits their time between Raymond Central and Malcolm. SROs have evolved over the years. We were talking earlier in the lobby about the SRO program in 1971 that started with Lincoln police officers and Lancaster County Sheriff's deputies involved in that program. And I'm not sure if they were full-time at that time, but when I came on the department in 1976, we had school resource officers, but it wasn't a full-time job for them. And so SROs have evolved over the years, and as Dr. Joel and I talked, our tactics have evolved over the years on how we handle situations at schools. The one thing that hasn't changed is the relationship and the trust that's built between police officers in schools and the students. Our SROs, especially Joe Gear down in Norris, most of the students know his personal cell phone. If they have an issue, if they know of a friend that's in trouble or is saying something that's not appropriate, more than likely Deputy Gear's going to get a call at home, and then he can start that process in getting that situation taken care of. So rural schools are different than urban schools, but yet they're the same, and the issues are somewhat the same. We narrowly averted disaster 10 or 12 years ago in Malcolm when a young man brought a number of improvised explosive devices and firearms to schools. This was at our old strategy and law enforcement strategy prior to Columbine was to hold and wait for a SWAT team. Those tactics have changed if there's an active shooter or a serious trouble in a school, to where it evolved to 3-person teams going in and eliminating the threat, and now it's if you get there, go in, no matter the number of deputies or officers there. So I guess the bottom line and the reason we're all here is we know that it can happen in Lincoln or Lancaster County, and that we need to be prepared to deal with that when it happens. We've been able to institute our SRO program incrementally. It's never as quick as we might like to have officers in schools, but what we've tried to do in the past is leverage federal grant funding and ease the financial burden on the districts so that over a 3 or 4 year period of time, their percentage will increase, as will the counties. The county board's been very good about agreeing to pick up that extra 60% of the employees' salaries, while the schools pay about 40%. And so it's been a great partnership. Our SROs do a great job, and they're our force multiplier for the rest of our agency, which is, as Chief Blymeister said, we're all spread pretty thin. We just don't have the bodies to put in place everywhere we'd like. So from that perspective, the SRO program is a wonderful program. It does great work, and it augments our normal workforce.
Thank you, Sheriff. So as another piece of the protection that we have is assessing the threats that we have in our schools. And so for threat assessment and threat management, Chief Blymeister and Joe Wright will explain.
I'll touch on it briefly. Threat assessment and threat management is preventative in nature. And what I want to do is provide a hypothetical so maybe we can all understand what this is about. A concerned parent, her son, is going through some traumatic times, the loss of a parent, the breakup, they're entering into the uncertainty of the teenage years. And this young man is demonstrating that he's attempting to acquire a firearm. Now, could it be because he's interested in hunting or sporting with that particular firearm? It certainly could be. But this mother, out of concern, because she takes an active role in her kid's life, dives into the social media, the internal workings of the cell phone and their computers. Calls the Lincoln Police Department and explains this. And now an individual that is a school resource officer who has had interactions, both positive and in an enforcement setting, with this particular student in the past, sits down and has a long, long conversation with the student, relays the concerns of what's going on, and is told that there's absolutely no intent to cause anybody harm. Now, this particular student's been in a physical assault recently at the school. And the SRO wants to make sure that things are going to be okay. So the SRO starts a process that we do every single day at the Lincoln Police Department. Every day, they make a referral through either the Mental Health Association or through Centerpoint to try to get the individual help. They're not making arrests. They're trying to improve the quality of life and improve the chance of success. But the school resource officer in the threat assessment doesn't stop there, because now they're going to verify what this young man is telling him. And they go to his mother, and they search their room together just to make sure that there isn't any stockpile of weapons that are being amassed or any notes or plans that are following through on something that he's not sharing. And then they go even further. And the individual that seems to be the focus of some of this animosity based upon the physical altercation that had occurred in the school, they go to them and their parents. And they talk to them and make sure that there isn't more to this story. Well, that's not where it stops either, and that's where this partnership is so important, because all of this information is shared by the school resource officer with Joe and John Sundemeyer. And there are things that the Lincoln Police Department can do within the constitutional boundaries, and there should be clear delineation and separation of what we have. But there are things that the school can do too to ensure this kid's safety, the safety of everybody attending the school, and of the individual that has been the focus. So in summary, that's what threat assessment looks like. It doesn't necessitate arrest. It is preventative, and it improves the quality of life.
I'll just add to the Chief's comments that threat assessment is progressive in nature and preventative in nature. It is absolutely in line with the concept and theory of community policing, which is LPD's strength. We already have a strong program at LPS and at LPD. In fact, the county has an excellent community team, multidisciplinary team, which was put together by former LPD captain, current LPS security coordinator John Sundemeyer. We have exceptionally strong relationships between LPD, LPS, the Sheriff's Office, and many other community partners. So my message to you is that increasing the capacity of our threat assessment effort increases prevention and increases safety.
Next, we're going to hear about the joint training and exercises with the Lincoln Public Schools, Lincoln Fire and Rescue, Lincoln Police. Director Cassidy.
Just to close out that discussion of threat assessment, the chief and I are of the same mind that enhancing our threat assessment capability is the very best thing that we can do in this community to improve school safety. So that would be number one on our list of priorities, is to have more resources available for the police department to conduct and respond to threat assessment and threat management. For about the past 6 years, we have made a real effort here in Lincoln to improve our preparedness in the event of some kind of a mass casualty incident or a critical incident occurring at a school through training and exercising. And this has involved the school district, it's involved the police department, and also Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Lincoln Fire and Rescue, of course, is the emergency medical provider here in our community. And we have seen in the after-action review of several mass shooting events at a variety of different facilities in the country, not just schools, how important it is to coordinate the law enforcement response and the EMS response. Nothing worse than having paramedics and EMTs on the scene but unable to treat a patient because of the lack of certainty about the safety in entering a shopping mall, for example, or a school. So we've done a lot of work to try to do a better job there. Joe Wright mentioned a few of those things. He mentioned that all of our personnel have access to site plans and floor plans 24/7, 365. And that's true of our firefighters and their apparatus and our police officers in their patrol cars on their mobile data computers, even their handheld devices for that matter. A very, very good development, something that required quite a bit of coordination, but now that we've got it in place, going forward when changes are made and schools are remodeled or new schools are built, we have the process in place to make sure that we've got that information. This has been a problem in a lot of mass shooting events around the country over the years. Just simply the difficulty of gaining situational awareness at a large complex like a shopping mall or a large school. Parkland was a pretty good example of that. There were a lot of problems there with the lack of situational awareness. You had two different law enforcement agencies operating on two different radio systems. The radio system had a failure during the incident because it was over capacity. Essentially, all of its capacity was used up. So when we see these kinds of things, we try to take lessons away and incorporate those into our training and our exercising and our planning. Joe also mentioned that all the doors at Lincoln Public Schools are numbered. That was a decision that we reached collaboratively with law enforcement, first responders, and LPS as a way of making it easier for people to gain that situational awareness. It's so critical during an incident. And we've done a number of exercises and joint training sessions. I recall specifically one of the very first ones we did was a full-scale exercise that we did at Clough Corner Elementary School. And it was very, very informative for us to learn about the problems that we would experience and to address those. Some of this training has been full-scale exercises like the one at Clough Corner, and some of it has been much more low-key. It's been small group training done by individual police units at an individual school. But I think I can tell you that we are much better prepared through training and exercising today than we were 6 years ago in the event that we might have some kind of an incident at school that required EMS and police response.
A couple points to follow up on Director Cassidy. When we talk about the ability to digest incoming information, our communication staff in the 911 operators and call takers are outstanding and incorporated into this particular training process because they are going to be the first point of contact and they're going to be quickly overwhelmed, so they need to be able to digest through that particular information. LPD, in partnership with LPS, if the unthinkable event occurs, we do have access to their camera systems, immediate access, and we incorporate that in and will continue to incorporate that into our training methodologies. And to follow up on something that Sheriff Wagner said and Director Cassidy, if that unthinkable event occurs here, you have my assurances because it is my belief that our officers will respond appropriately and they will do everything within their power to immediately save as many lives as possible.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear about what happens when students have issues and disciplinary issues, and going to hear from Sarah Hoyle, Director of Lancaster County Human Services, and also Chris Turner with the Lancaster County Chief Deputy Attorney. Thank you.
Good morning. I am going to go over the path that led us to those programs that Chief mentioned earlier, and that is Project Restore, and then our school-based alcohol and marijuana intervention program. I think that it's important for everyone to understand the history and the initiative that we did that brought Restore to our community. Lancaster County, for the past almost 20 years, has had a system in place to analyze system point data. And when I say system point data, I'm talking about each level that a child touches as they go through the juvenile justice system, starting with arrest, ending with if there's any out-of-home placements that the child ends up going to. So when we look at different system points, we look to determine if there's disproportionality and if that disproportionality is a result of any disparity within the system. So that takes us to look at a further dive into the data. So we look at different things like detention, and there's different things that we can put into place to ensure that kids coming into the system are screened with an objective, evidence-based, validated screening assessment, that kids have graduated sanctions built in. And so I'm proud to say that in Lancaster County, our detention numbers range between 10 to 15. And so then we get to the system point of arrest. And arrest is a little more difficult. And arrest is more difficult because of the way that kids enter the system. As Chief has mentioned before, arrest is reactive in nature. So how do we as a community impact the amount of police calls going into the Lincoln Police Department? So when we look more into the data at arrest, we see that, and we analyze several different things with the help of several evaluators in the community. We look to see if once a juvenile enters the system, is every juvenile treated the same? Meaning that when we have calls come in to the police department and a suspect is identified, is that suspect arrested at the same rate, be it a minority suspect or a white suspect? Yes. That data came back and said, yes, they are. So then we look back and we say, okay, where can we as a community impact a bulk of our kids? What is happening? What's a low-hanging fruit that we can impact? And that was the assaults and the disturbing the pieces that's occurring within the school system. So we reached out, we applied for technical assistance from Georgetown University. We sent a team. I'm proud to say we had the largest team at Georgetown University that went and participated. LPD was there, Lincoln School had a representative there, County Attorney's Office, we had our evaluator with us, and we all learned about how to reduce racial and ethnic disparities within our system. We also learned about the school-to-prison pipeline. Georgetown University helped us come up with the policies and the procedures around Project Restore. And I want to say, too, that there's several different programs throughout the country that have school-based diversion techniques, components built into them. But I'm proud of our community because we are one of the few, one of the only, that has one that's focused on assault. Other communities, when they set up systems like this, they picked low-level offenses where there was not a victim present. So we were warned when we saw that assaults is what we needed to impact, that our program would have to be different. It would have to be different, and it would have to have more components built into it to provide for restoration and the victim empathy component. So with that, we were able to formulate a program that's built on evidence-based practices, keeping kids out of the juvenile justice system, and instilling that restorative justice principles around what we're serving with youth. And Chris is going to talk more about the specifics of the program.
Thank you. Good morning. Again, my name is Chris Turner. I'm the Chief Deputy of the Juvenile Division within the County Attorney's Office, recently appointed to that position. And our office does have a role to play with the Restore program, and I'll tell you a little bit about what that Restore program looks like as it's implemented. It is a coordinated effort between Lincoln Public Schools, Lincoln Police Department, as well as my office, and then the Human Services Department with the city and the county. What it does is it's an early intervention or diversionary program that is intended to avoid youth unnecessarily entering the juvenile justice system. And not that the juvenile justice system is a bad system, it's a system that definitely has its services, but it's important that as we look at youth entering into, that we're matching those youth and their risks and their needs with the appropriate level of services. And so this particular program begins with a law enforcement contact and an investigation. The reporting of the offense is no different from the Lincoln Police Department. after a Restore program was initiated than it was before. And so that process looks the same. There's still an investigation. But then if it qualifies, and again, this particular program was designed to look at assaults and disturbing the peace. Those two offense categories were determined to be the biggest category where impact could be made. And so if there is a referral for an assault or disturbing the peace that is sent from the police department to my office, I screen that case to determine its eligibility. There are a number of factors we look at. Some of those are based on the seriousness of the assault. So if there is serious injury, they would not be allowed to participate with Restore if it involved a weapon, was gang-related, and there's several others. One of the other criteria we look at are, does this youth, have they already been adjudicated in court? And that may be something that then keeps them out of this Restore program. But if they are determined to be eligible, that referral goes to the Human Resources or Human Services Department, and then they begin making the referrals and setting up the programming. The programming itself includes things like mediation, can include community service, restitution. These restorative justice principles are implemented to hopefully have the change in behavior that we all want to see, to avoid reoffending. And the victim is a part of that process. They're allowed, if they choose, to participate in that mediation. The findings so far indicate that since November of 2015, when the project was implemented until December of 2017, there were approximately 200 youth with an assault or a disturbing the peace referral. Those approximately 200 youth were screened and 120 were determined eligible. Of those, 85% completed that program successfully. Of those who did not participate, approximately half were because of previous offenses that were already court involved, 14% because they had previously participated in a diversionary program, and 12% that declined to participate on their own. And so that's an overview of the Restore program that again deals with assault and disturbing the peace. There's also, I would say, kind of a companion of SAMI. That's the school-based alcohol and marijuana intervention program. And that deals specifically with youth who are contacted in the school setting for it could be a possession of marijuana ticket, a possession of drug paraphernalia, MIP, something that involves substance abuse. And there's a similar criteria that allows that youth to be diverted away from a formal diversion program or the court process. Thank you.
All right, and our last presentation will be on community learning centers and their role in school safety. Lynn Johnson, Director of Parks and Rec, and also Nola Derby-Bennett, Director of the CLC programs for Lincoln Public Schools.
Thank you. Good morning. Community learning centers are a coordinated service delivery model using school sites to deliver programming aimed at student achievement with support to families and neighborhoods. CLC programming is offered before and after school and during summer months. There is an overall set of goals for CLC sites, and programming is individualized through the guidance of a School Neighborhood Advisory Council, or SNAC. Each CLC site develops an annual plan based on recommendations from the SNAC and community stakeholders. A key element of CLCs is the school community coordinator, who is a full-time employee embedded in each of our 26 CLC sites and who is responsible for development and implementation of CLC programming consistent with the annual plan that connects the school day to the after-school programming and responds to the needs of families and the neighborhood. CLC programs provide safe, purposeful, supervised activities for children and youth during times when they might otherwise be unsupervised. After-school periods are also times when children, youth, and family members might most easily meet with social workers and counselors to address behavioral health concerns. CLCs are located in Title I schools. Currently, there are 26 CLC sites in Lincoln, 19 elementary, 6 middle, and 1 high school, with 6 Title I schools that are not yet CLC sites. Funding for CLC is achieved by coordinating funding sources together, including federal and local grants, LPS funds, city funds, and agency funds. Overall, the current spending for the CLC initiative is about $7.2 million. In 2016-17, 7,973 students participated in CLC programming. 66% of CLC students qualify for free or reduced lunch, and 48% of CLC students are students of color. CLC students achieve higher standardized assessment scores for reading, math, and science than peers at their schools who do not participate in CLC. In 2015, a group of stakeholders came together to develop a strategic plan to strengthen and expand CLC services. And you have that handout coming around that kind of highlights for you the phases of the strategic plan. And so hopefully that helps to explain kind of how the strategic plan fits into the discussion today. Since the 2015 strategic plan, one additional school has been added, so that has brought us up to the 26 sites, and that site was Campbell. One thing I do want to mention is that as we talk about safety, I have a first grader, and I've probably spent face-to-face time with her classroom teacher less than a half a dozen times during the school year, but I see the before and after school staff every single day. And so as we talk about intervention and ability to identify crisis as it's happening with a family, we believe that the school community coordinators and the staff at the CLCs are often the first folks who have the ability to notify school staff that something is going on in the life of a child and in their family. So, they may be the first person to identify that a family is food insecure, or that they have become homeless, or that a parent has left the household, or a parent has rejoined the household, and that changes the dynamics. And so really when we talk about CLCs in the context of school security, we need to really think about that as a continuum of support for families. So the early end is the CLCs and those daily interactions and those daily interventions with families to help them connect to the supports and services in our community that they need in order to be successful. The far end of that spectrum is what the gentlemen to my right have been talking about when it comes to threat assessment and those types of interventions. And so I think that what we're talking about is really that continuum of support that our community, I think, has spoken loud and clear in telling us that we want to be protective, proactive, and preventive when it comes to support and safety of our students. Turn it over to Lynn.
Good morning. I apologize for passing around individual sheets this morning. We were printing at 8:45, so. I'll explain a little bit about the sheets that you have. The first one is the pie chart and what that describes. We've had a number of questions about the funding of the CLC initiative, and this is a summary of the funding of the initiative. And as we've discussed in the past, it's really a combination of public schools funding, of federal funding, including 21st century grants, the city funding, lead agencies, which is the largest portion of the funding, a number of grants, and then in-kind funding. And in-kind could be things like Boy Scout programs within the programs, Girl Scouts, 4-H programs, and that kind of thing. Every CLC site looks a little bit different, but every CLC site, the funding pie chart probably looks very similar to this. At least most of these categories would be included in each one of the CLC sites. We call it a braided funding strategy. It really is NOLA today and NOLA's office who is coordinating, putting together the funding for each one of those sites. And like I say, every one of the sites is going to probably look very similar to this pie chart. The percentages may be different, but it's really that big combination of funding. On a very large scale, LPS today is about 17% of the funds. Federal funding, city funds is about 19% of the funds. And if Kent Seacrest were here, he refers to the private agencies that are involved in this. They're the largest portion, and they're about 32% of the funding. The second sheet that you have has this chart of the individual 26 sites. There are, as Nola indicated, there are currently 26 schools, Title I schools in Lincoln that are CLC sites. There are 11 lead agencies who coordinate and deliver services at those sites. And to be perfectly honest, that's one of the strengths of this initiative, and that's really what's made this recognized across the country as a model initiative. It really is that many community partners coming together and to deliver coordinated services at each one of the schools. On the back side of that sheet is the snapshot for last academic year. And this is what Nola shared about the number of students participating, the number of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, the number of students who are students of color. And probably the most significant piece of that is the assessment piece. And I think one of the things that we're all very proud of the initiative for is that students participating in CLCs are achieving and they're succeeding, that their test scores their test scores are actually rival the district's test scores overall, and they are higher than their peers at their schools who do not participate in CLCs. So we've got demonstrated impact of CLCs on the students' academic success. The fourth sheet that you received is this one with the 4 colors, and this really summarizes the strategic planning effort that was done a few years ago. And this was really looking at a couple of things. One is that the group recognized that in order for the initiative to deepen and expand, it was going to have some additional funding at the leadership level, and that's really what's in the blue column. A portion of what is being proposed as part of the CLC, or the CLC JPA budget, the JPA budget, I apologize, is included in that blue box. And then the colored boxes on the side, the yellow, the green, the orange box, is how the initiative could expand in the future. And so the intent is to deepen programming at the existing 26 sites today, then to expand to the remaining 6 sites, 6 Title I schools that are not part of the CLC initiative. And then the long-term vision is to take the strengths of the CLC initiative of connecting the academic learning that happens during the school day to purposeful activities during after-school hours and bring that essentially to all schools within Lincoln. And then the fourth handout you have is the proposed budget, or the suggested budget for the Community Learning Center initiative, for the Safe and Successful Kids JPA. And I think, as everybody has said, there's really 3 elements of this. There's the protective piece, there's the preventive piece, and then there is the proactive piece. And some city council members, and I'm certain probably some school board members, have had questions about the staffing, the impacts that bringing additional funding to this effort will have on staffing. Under protective programming, the draft agreement says that no more than 30% of the funding through the JPA will go to protective programming. The intent is to bring 6 additional school resource officers. Those would be at the 12 existing middle schools, and a threat assessment officer. The cost of the JPA would be about $446,000. The protective programming piece, or pardon me, the preventive programming piece is adding 1 social worker at LPS, and then that person would be responsible for coordinating contracted services with our private behavioral health and mental health services within the community. The cost there is $400,000. And then the proactive programming, which in the agreement, it states that it will be at least 40% of the funding that comes through the JPA. And the first portion of that is, and you can see the breakdown there, is to enhance the leadership as was discussed during the strategic planning process. About $223,000 would be added there. And it would really be adding 1 full-time staff person who'd be responsible for curriculum and family support, actually adding some additional funding to that position, be taking an office assistant position, moving that to full-time, and then some contracted public information and fund development activities, about $8,000 for professional development, and then there's benefits for full-time staff. The programming piece, including some additional funding for scholarships and family support, is about $380,000, and so the additional funding that would be brought to the initiative through the JPA would be about $603,000. One of the numbers that we don't have specifically identified at this point is the amount that the financial and legal administrative support will cost. We've got to sit down and work through those numbers. Some of you may recognize that the number at the bottom of the sheet is a new number, and this is really has happened from the finance staff at both the city and LPS working together, and the projections of the amount of revenue that would be generated the first year actually a little bit higher than we thought. We'd been projecting about $2 million of additional funding, and we actually think it's going to be closer to about $2.1 million, and so that number is new. Please note the note at the bottom of the page, because of the timing that it takes to get police officers hired and then trained. The first year expenditures will look different than this because of the initial startup costs of getting those officers trained and then transferring officers from the existing force to serve as SROs in the schools. One of the things I was hoping to talk just a little bit about, and this question comes up regularly, about why a JPA, and I really think it's three things. One is that it creates designated, dedicated funding for this purpose, to make sure that our kids are safe and successful. It creates a coordinated process for the school district and the city to work together. I've heard Connie say this many times. This is one arm of the city wrapping around our kids. This is one arm of the district wrapping around our kids. The JP is really where we come together, and this is that coordinated piece that causes us to have focused discussions on at least an annual basis in development of the budget. And then the third piece is transparency. And that transparency piece is that these will be public discussions of the JPA body happening in public. There will be focused discussions around the funding and the programs that are developed through that funding that will be very transparent and visible to the community. In Lincoln, we've made a decision that our entertainment district is important enough that we're going to have a JPA, and we're going to do this same sort of coordinated discussion. We're going to have dedicated funding, and we're going to have transparent processes. We think that our kids are at least as important as our entertainment district, and that we ought to have the same emphasis on coordination, transparency, and identifying dedicated ongoing funding for the purposes of making sure that kids in Lincoln are safe and successful. And we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
We'll get that chance in just a moment. Okay. All right. I was just informed that there are a couple of individuals here who do work on the mental health side of things. And if it's all right with my colleagues, since we are running a little ahead of schedule, if we could hear from them about what's being done in the community. And so Katie McLeese-Stevenson and Dennis Hoffman, if you could borrow the microphone and just give us a few minutes about the kinds of mental health services that are being provided to youth in our community. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Katie McLeese-Stevenson, and I serve as Executive Director of the Child Guidance Center.
Good morning, and I'm Dennis Hoffman, Executive Director of Family Service Lincoln. Katie and I have been working together for a while to talk about what mental health services we can bring to the table. We already are involved in a lot of schools at LPS right now, and we really believe that the mental health component is not only an issue of safety, but also of helping kids succeed. As you've heard today, a lot of the folks has been on crisis, but we really believe that the mental health services can prevent that crisis from even becoming an issue, that our therapists work with kids every day that are dealing with trauma, serious emotional disturbances, and family conflict. So we really think that we bring that piece that prevents the incident from ever coming to the table in the first place.
One of the things that we hear in our experiences from both administrators and teachers is that mental health is one of the toughest issues that they deal with within the school setting. It's difficult for that child, it's difficult for their family, and it also prevents learning for other students. And so one of the great things about school-based mental health services is that we are right there. We're in a non-stigmatized setting. Folks aren't having to walk into a mental health center or a clinic of some sort, and the services can be provided within the school day, and those therapists can also serve as a resource to the teachers and to the administrators about how to best provide services to that student and that family. And so we're located in the elementary schools, the middle schools, and the high schools. Just by point of reference, we are in 13 together. Our two agencies are in 13 of the elementary schools, and there are 25 elementary schools that do not have therapists from one of our two agencies, and two schools we are both in, so once in a while we're both in the same school. In the middle school level, we are in 7 middle schools, and there are 5 middle schools that do not have behavioral health therapists from our 2 agencies, and we are currently in all of the high schools. And then we have also therapists in a couple of our specialized programs at Sherrill and at Nuremberger Educational Centers.
I might add to that too, even though that we're represented in a lot of schools, typically a counselor is contracted to work in the school maybe twice a week. So really access and availability is limited, and that's around funding. So we'd like to be present 5 days a week so that if an incident does occur, that we can be there as part of the partnership with LPS and others involved with the students.
That's a great point, that we're not typically on site more than 2 days a week in these buildings, and so we're seeing a limited number of students. And if we think about mental health in general, it's suggested that 1 in 5 individuals have an issue with mental health. So that would be probably about 8,400 of the LPS students, and we're just serving a very, very small percentage of those students by our school-based services currently. And so easily, I think expansion of those services could be well utilized within the programs and within the aspects of school safety.
Thank you very much. All right. So this is an opportunity now for elected officials to ask any questions that you have of any individuals who have made presentations this morning. And this is not open mic time. I'm sorry, but this is an important opportunity for the elected officials to engage all of the presenters and the issues that are beforehand. If members of the audience who have come want to engage somebody after the meeting, certainly those who are able to stay around will be happy to do that. Okay? Questions? Roma?
If I may, we have 2 microphones here for the elected officials, and so if you could pass those around each half of our delegation.
Thank you. My name is Roma Amundsen, and I'm Lancaster County Commissioner. I did have a question. I did note in the newspaper, you know, that there was a music teacher featured on the front page, a person of color. And so actually my question is this: in view of the SROs, the intervention staff, counselors, and staff who really work with students of disproportionate minority, what is the percentage of those people who actually represent those communities? Do you have an idea of that?
Roma, I'm going to have to ask, can you kind of clarify that?
Okay, how many SROs actually represent the people of disproportionate minorities?
We have 6 school resource officers, and you're asking for the demographic?
Yes.
5 are male, 1 are female currently.
Okay, and people of color?
None. Not today.
And then I guess when it comes down to counselors within the school systems? Or?
Could we have our superintendent? We do have a central microphone here too, so perhaps if you speak up.
Because I think it's really important that we do make the effort, just as what the Lincoln Public Schools are doing, you know, in terms of hiring that particular music teacher of color. I just was wondering how we are representing those people from figures of authority too.
Roma, to that particular point, we agree with you wholeheartedly. Our agency does not reflect the community that we serve, nor does the law enforcement profession across the nation. 15% of our workforce is female. And so
Roma's addressing though in the school system.
Yeah, the school system.
Joel, you could help us there.
So what I would say is that's a part of our strategic plan, and it's something we've been working on for a number of years. We're making progress, but albeit it's slow. So our intent is to have more adults representative of the demographics that they're working with, and that was the article that you saw. We have a program where we're trying to introduce the education profession to students of diversity. We've been doing that for several years with the idea that, you know, if we can get them through a pipeline, maybe through our career academy and then ultimately through college and then come and work for Lincoln Public Schools, that would be the ideal.
Next question, Barb?
Yeah, okay, sorry. I was wondering, this particular JPA plan, how will this go and increase the number of mental health services in our schools? Do you know if it's going to like increase it by 25%, double it? What is the impact?
That may very well be an LPS question. My understanding today is that there are 27, I think, social workers working in the schools. The intent here is to hire one additional social worker who then would be responsible for coordinating contractual services with providers, family service, family guidance, child guidance, excuse me. To reach those, I think one of the advantages that this model potentially has is that this will also allow us to expand some of those services to after-school hours. And we think that those after-school hours may be more convenient times for kids and families to be working with social workers. So we're looking at, with this additional funding, more coordination between what's happening in the schools during the school day and what's happening after school. I think every one of our SCCs, probably across the initiative, would say they would benefit from having additional support for behavioral and mental health services.
That's really helpful, Lynn. Thank you. To know that we're bringing mental health services into the CLCs. I really welcome that. I don't want to hog the phone, but microphone. But I have one other question, and that is with our SROs, about on average currently, and then what do you predict in the future, will be the percentage of time that they'll be able to be in our schools as opposed to being called away?
Barb, that's a great question. And so currently today, based upon the contract, if a school resource officer is absent from the building that they're assigned to, so let's use Lincoln East High School for an example, for a period that extends more than 5 days that school is in session, then the Lincoln Police Department needs to take from our current staffing levels and replace that. And that happened this year. The school resource officer that is assigned to Lincoln East had to have surgery, and we have backfilled that position on a full-time basis, probably for the remainder of the school year. And for the future part of it is one that we continue to kind of to negotiate and struggle with, because as we increase if we would increase the number of SROs in the middle schools by 6, by 12, depending on what other number we come up with, we still have to be able to provide a skilled, trained individual to fill into that role and not deviate from the remainder of our mission, which is the community at large. So we're still working through that particular process.
And Barb, on a daily basis, you know, a school resource officer comes to headquarters, gets his or her equipment, picks up their car, they go to a briefing at the beginning of their shift, and then they hit the road, and they're in the school basically for the school day. Although any police officer is occasionally called away for something like a court appearance, a deposition, a training session, and that does happen. But that's their assignment. That's where they're supposed to be. And really, the only time they're pulled out of the school, other than for things like court appearances and training, would be a really dire emergency, and those are few and far between.
Thank you.
Jane Raybould, Lincoln City Council. It's sort of a follow-up question to Barb's. I wanted to know the placeholder for funding of $400,000 for the preventive program. That is in addition, correct, to the current LPS funding for mental health, behavioral health supports. It doesn't supplant the existing funding.
Exactly. That would be new dollars to the initiative.
Terrific. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Good morning, and on behalf of the district, thanks to our friends of the county and city for coming here today. My question is about the threat assessment and threat management expansion. Would the increased resources for that, the additional officer, be used to improve the response time of the current assessments? What I'm thinking of is your process where you receive a referral, you do an assessment of it, and then there's a determination made if additional action needs to happen. Is this to increase the number of assessments that are done, to increase or to decrease the response time, or does it change the threshold of when an assessment takes place? And as a follow-up to that, are there referrals that are being unassessed today?
I can tell you that there are referrals that are not, we're meeting every referral that comes in. The timeliness of that and the amount of work and effort that is provided is something that will be improved. One of the things that we believe that where our current practices and policies in threat assessment fall short is the continuum. So after the immediate has been interceded in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, of doing similar practices that I just spoke about in that hypothetical example, meeting with the parents, with the kids, and that pathway is still going in the correct direction. So that's where we believe that there will be improvement. We also believe that strongly this continuity. If we do not have an officer that is assigned full-time to doing threat assessment, that continuity, those relationships that would be established with Joe and John and the remainder of those at the specific buildings within the school district will be improved through that full-time presence.
Ms. Lamb, I'm going to recognize you for a question.
Thank you very much, and I too want to echo thanks for everyone being here. I have two questions, and one's probably going to be answered very quickly, so I'll just ask them and pass on the money. For Joe, you had mentioned that the schools, that there are just a few that don't have secured entrances, and so I just wondered what that number was and what the plan was to secure those. And then for Sarah, one of the pieces that you mentioned was victim empathy, and I'm really interested in that because I think that that's what we're seeing when these tragedies occur, is there just seems to be a lack of appreciation for and empathy for the folks that are victims. So I'd like it if you would address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lamb. I apologize, I don't have an exact number of the offices that don't have a locked door between the main office and the rest of the building. We're in process with leadership from our Director of Operations, Scott Wieskamp, of building a plan of what all those entrances look like and how we could put a solution in place for each office. Every building is slightly different. And then with leadership from the board, we'll determine, I think at that point, how they would like to proceed.
Thank you for this question. As far as victim empathy goes, when we look at evidence-based practice around how to instill victim empathy in different types of juvenile youth in our system, we look at ways that we're never going to be able to repair the harm that was done to the victim, but we can certainly attempt to do that through the youth. And so we're looking at those restorative principles that I'm proud to say we've partnered with LPS on getting a restorative justice coordinator for LPS to have circles in the school, to have different types of mediations occur when there's an assault maybe between kids or when there's a disagreement, because we're trying to get the victim back to the place they were before and to flush out any type of ongoing dispute that they may have. So when we're talking about what it looks like when it comes into our system, different things that we can put into place, we have apology letters. We have the youth set in if the victim is not able to or does not want to engage anymore with that youth, then we have surrogate victims set in on a victim offender mediation so that that youth can hear how this impacted me when you broke my window, what I had to go through, how I had to go out and get a cost estimate, how I had to put money up front, how I had to take time off work, and things that sometimes people don't think about when they're hurting other people.
Thank you. I'll recognize Mr. Mayhew.
There are some in the community who would like to see us do 12 SROs instead of 6. And what I'm hearing is that to do 12, that would create challenges just from an operational point of view in terms of the time that it would take. What I'm also hearing, though, is that even with 6, there could potentially be challenges. Could you speak to the feasibility of adding 6 SROs and what a timeline for that might look like?
Great question. So currently, if we're operating on a premise that we could hire and implement 6 school resource officers, we have an academy that is beginning in July, on July 19th. We have been going through the recruiting and vetting of the candidates for those that will start in that particular class for about 3 months now. If there is authorization based upon the approval of this JPA or some other document that allows us to increase our authorized staffing by that number, then the timetable becomes 20 to 22 weeks of academy training and about the same amount of field training, where they're participating with a seasoned officer being evaluated on a daily basis. But we currently, today, have 9 officers in our field training program, 21 in the academy. And we believe that if we can maintain current staffing levels, just normal attrition, because there's constantly people that are retiring, we believe that we could implement a strategy of 6 new SROs in January of 2019. And Don, that has a couple different points to it. One is it coincides with our annual bid process for the officers themselves. And 2, it coincides with the beginning of the 3rd quarter for a school year, and so there would be that continuity. We cannot compromise the standards of the people that we're hiring. There are only so many individuals within our agency that have the passions and skills to be able to serve in a role as a school resource officer. So those are things that we continue to evaluate. And we believe that 6 is a doable number. 12 would take more time. Hopefully that answers your question.
Matt Schulte, Jennifer Brinkman, Larry Baird, and Todd Wilgen. So let's go. We've got 11 minutes.
All right. Real quick, Sheriff Wagner, what's the percentage LPS splits with Lincoln Public 65-35 the cost of an SRO? What does that look like in the county?
About 60-40.
Oh, so it's pretty similar.
Very similar. Actually, we're using the same funding formula that the police department uses.
Okay. And then, Mr. Cassidy, you had mentioned earlier about the daily briefing being a part of the role. And I think that conflicts with some of our start times in some of our high schools. Is there any thoughts on how we might be able to address that so we have resource officers there right at the beginning of every day?
Yeah, really tough to do, Mr. Schulte, and I'll explain why. You know, our officers are working an 8-hour shift, and they've got to get their equipment. We can't have them do uncompensated work off the clock, so they've got to come in and pick up their patrol car, change into their uniform, get ready to go. And that can be difficult because, you know, school start time is not set. I mean, if it started exactly at 8 o'clock at every school every day, we could adjust. But I think we do an awfully good job of getting people there at the start of the school day. Our real problem is at the end of the school day. And, you know, I just looked. This afternoon, we're going to have 53 police officers on duty, Lincoln police officers on duty, at 3 o'clock p.m. That hour between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock, that's the number of officers on duty. There are 83 schools in Lincoln, K through 12, public and parochial. And, you know, you wouldn't have enough officers to have someone in the vicinity of all the schools, even if there wasn't a single traffic crash or a single shoplifter picked up at Target, a single fight going on at the Satellite Lounge, and all the other things. And, of course, all of those things are going on, and so much so that during that hour, from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock this afternoon, our dispatchers will typically be looking at a screen full of requests for service to whom there is no one available to send. So they have to be prioritized based on the nature of the call. That's very, very typical, beginning at about the same time schools are dismissing. So our school resource officers, you know, are there for a full 8-hour shift, but activities at schools, as you know, they begin at, like, you know, 0700, and they go on until about 2300 in the evening. So, you know, it's an all-day thing.
If I can just piggyback on Chief Cassidy's comments. We're in a little bit different situation where our deputies have take-home cars. So they have their patrol units with them. We have tried to do a virtual type of briefing where the deputies can call in service, get briefed via their mobile data computer, and then be on their district or be at their school. We have tried varying variations of that and haven't had super good success. But the thing we want to avoid is a disconnect between school resource officers or any other specialized position and the normal law enforcement functions that happen every day within our office. And so they need to be connected, you know, as things go. They need to know what's going on in the districts surrounding the schools that they work in, and they need to let other deputies know what's going on in the schools that they're working in. So it's a give and take, and that's critically important.
Thank you, Ms. Brinkman.
Well, I think it's clear from the presentation today how important the coordination and communication between our government agencies, our nonprofit agencies, and the community at large is so important. I just want to kind of go back to a catastrophic incident response. The county board was recently approached by mutual aid because we have several rural fire departments that have not yet budgeted or have radios that will sync with the new radio system that's being implemented. So I wanted to bring that up and also ask if there are other communication or infrastructure needs that are being identified by any of your agencies that we should be keeping in mind as we all, go through the budget process this year.
I'll address that, Ms. Brinkman. As you know, the City of Lincoln is in the process of replacing its public safety radio communications system. The old system was 30 years old. Each of the rural fire departments that has an EMS service, so the ones that provide ambulance service on their own, have at least one radio. A few of them have 2 radios that are in those ambulances. Those radios are used to communicate with the hospitals here in Lincoln, and the old radios will be obsolete. So they'll need to replace those, and they've known about that for a minimum of 4 years, that need was upcoming. And we have provided pricing information on what it will cost to replace those radios to all the rural fire districts. As you know, the rural fire districts have their own funding sources. We have provided the same discount to the rural fire districts that the City of Lincoln enjoys from our vendor. So that's passed through entirely to the non-city users. Their bread and butter radios, the ones that they use for their own internal operations, not for communicating with the hospitals, are conventional radios that will continue to work on the existing radio system, which is owned and maintained by the City of Lincoln. So they won't need to replace all of their radios, only the ones that are in ambulances, and it's an expense that they should have been planning for at least the past 4 years. Lincoln Public Schools likewise uses radios on a radio system owned and operated by the City of Lincoln. We can interoperate with that conventional radio system. It is a City of Lincoln infrastructure, and Lincoln Public Schools will have a few of the new radios that operate on the trunk public safety system as well. We are in the process of working out the final details of the interlocal agreement on that, but this is how we've operated for about 20 years now.
Thank you. My question has to do with the issue of disparity that was raised earlier, and we've heard a lot of reassuring information about, for instance, how SROs are trained with implicit bias training, as are our regular police officers, with behavioral and mental health services training, sort of specialized for the school-based setting, as well as the typical de-escalation skills. And we've heard from our human services and county attorney representatives that that we're seeing good success with our diversion programs. I think you also mentioned that only 3% of the referrals to the juvenile justice system are coming from SROs. So my question for LPS is, can you help us understand on the school side what kinds of training or mitigation efforts you're doing to to fight disparity in entry into the juvenile justice system. Because if we do see those numbers of referrals going up when an SRO is present in the school, and middle schools haven't had SROs in their schools in a long time, it seems to me being proactive about making sure they are ready for the presence of additional law enforcement is important to the success of this endeavor. Is there someone from LPS who could, Dr. Joel or LPS staff, who can talk about the training or mitigation of disparity in referrals?
Well, I think the training from SROs kind of comes at two directions for us. One is the national level from the NASRO training that we can send officers to. I knew we sent some last year and maybe the year before. Then we have some internal programming, or local programming, I should say, that deals a lot with disparate bias, implicit bias, not only with racial, ethnic, but with behavioral health issues, people who experience mental health or other disabilities. So along with that, maybe I'd go to Dr. Joel or Director Cassidy with how we can measure data once middle school SROs begin to measure what kind of disciplinary events trigger an arrest. We keep track of discipline and law violations at each school. So once SROs are placed in school, we'll be able to measure the differences according to those data sets, which include identifiers for race and ethnicity among the students.
And I would just merely reinforce what Mr. Wright said, that we're currently working on that, and it's an area that we've identified that we have more work yet to do, but certainly that's going to be a priority for us as we forward plan. But we look at our suspensions, our detentions, we look at our attendance, and we look at it across all demographic indicators, so we have a fairly good sense of what our referrals look like, but we have quite a bit more work to do to be able to align that then with what we're talking about.
If I could just clarify something, 3% of the juvenile referrals do not come from SROs citywide. That's only from the ones within schools. So of the referrals that originate with an incident at a school, about 3% of those originate with the school resource officer. But that's only speaking of the ones that originate at schools.
Well, and I understood
Yeah.
that, and I thought, who is making those 97% of those referrals, and do they have the same kind of access to opportunities for some of the implicit bias training?
Yeah. The other 97%, I mean, it's worth understanding how it is that a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old ends up being referred to juvenile court. It almost always starts with a merchant, a parent, or a school contacting the police department to report some kind of crime and expecting us to, investigate that, to do something about it. It doesn't start with a police officer who sees a young person committing a crime and decides to take proactive action. And within schools, those calls obviously are normally coming from schools, although occasionally from parents who learn about something that happened at school after the fact and then contact the police on their own.
Thank you.
I just have one quick question, and I wanted to follow up on something that Connie had mentioned regarding the behavioral health component, that only a small fraction of the needs are being met in the public school setting. And with the preventative programming, that $300,000, would that mean, what effect would that have on the needs for the school?
Well, I think between our two agencies, we're probably serving ballpark around 400 students at a time. And so it would certainly increase that. It wouldn't double it, but it would increase the ability to serve additional students.
Would it meet the needs?
No, it would not.
Can you estimate what percentage?
I'm not sure how to put a percentage on that number. We do know that all the schools, or the majority of the schools that we work in, do have a waiting list, and so not all kids are getting access. It costs us roughly $35 an hour to provide the service, so that gives you a dollar number to work from. We do know that we can't afford to let kids wait, and that's our priority. So even though we can't meet the entire need, if we can impact that so less kids are waiting, then I think we're ahead.
Okay.
Mr. Fisher, go ahead,
Thank-
final remarks there.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank everybody who has participated. Thank my colleagues on the school board and county board and city council. Perfect attendance, might add, so that doesn't often happen in these kinds of meetings. Obviously, a lot of interest. I want to thank members of the community who came to listen, to support, and obviously, while we may disagree about exactly how we get to where we want to get, I think we all recognize that our kids are our most valuable resource in this community. So glad that we're working together on this. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, well, thank you, and we are adjourned.
John.